All right, we are live with the one and only Rhonda Coleman. Rhonda, thank you for joining us. How exciting to have you here.
Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here, Sabrina.
Yeah, we were just kind of joking around about resiliency. We had a session 2 weeks ago, a live, and we had some technical difficulties, and we decided to go at it again because this is stuff I wish I would have known, and so I'm so glad you're coming on with us to share all of this. I appreciate it.
Yes.
Yeah. So for those folks who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background. You've kind of done it all.
Sure. Well, currently I'm a lawyer within the corporate sector, but I've not always been a lawyer. And let's say maybe 10 years ago, I pivoted to law, but before that, I was a teacher. I was a high school English teacher. And I grew up, like, born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. That's where I went to college. It's where I got my master's degree. I taught in the public school system there for 10 years. And, my network there was solid. I built a strong career as a teacher. But I began to feel unfulfilled. When you teach students, you give a lot of yourself every day. And I loved my students. I loved, those personalities that I would get every year. But at the end of the day, I'm like, what am I teaching myself? I taught English. It's like, okay, how many times can I teach verbs and subjects and predicates? And so I started to explore more my options. And I decided to pursue law school. So I had traveled abroad and lived abroad. So I had a global perspective, kind of, sort of. So I knew that I wanted to get my professional degree. I said, look, this JD is going to be my last degree, and I want to get it in a cosmopolitan area with a booming law community. So it was either New York City or Chicago. And I had recently divorced and had a first and third grader. So Chicago, I got into Loyola University of Chicago. It was great for me because it's a small New York, but still very family friendly, easier to navigate than New York. So I went with Chicago and went to law school, and I loved every minute of law school. People say you love it or you hate it. And I loved it because I made the conscious choice to pivot to law. I was just learning so much, pouring into myself every day, growing, expanding, exploring the city, with my kids. So I loved it. But when it came time to get a job, it was very difficult. It was difficult to navigate that process as a non-traditional student. So I underestimated the impact of not having a ready-made network in Chicago. So I had to build that myself while raising two kids. And I honestly underestimated the impact of being a Black woman.
Okay.
In
Wow.
law. I came from an environment where I was extremely nurtured and supported, in my community. My parents raised me to, like, feel like I could do anything, go anywhere, be anything, and my life had unfolded that way. But when I got, into law school and had to figure out, like, where am I going to work afterwards, that was a struggle. That was a struggle.
Yeah. I can only imagine being a single mom, taking on your doctorate's degree, taking on, this whole new industry. Today we're talking about seeing opportunity, and you took some massive shifts that I think otherwise would be so incredibly intimidating that most people wouldn't do it. And then to get from that place to where you are now as a deal strategist for Google, and you've kind of worked the gamut. You've worked at some of the largest, most innovative companies in the world, and strategic. So how did you start to see that opportunity? I mean, those leaps are not one that might be natural for most people to see. You know what I mean?
Right. I completely understand. So the first leap, going from teaching to law, I had entertained the idea of going to law school after undergrad. had taken, like signed up to take the LSAT and everything, but I was just like, I'm not ready to do all that reading. That's a really big commitment, you know? So it was a thought that where the seed had already been planted within me. So I revisited it. And I know my aunt told me once, like, sometimes you may not know exactly where you're going, but you know whatever's behind you is supposed to stay behind you. That's not where you're supposed to be. So I had to have some faith that, you know, as I moved forward, things would unfold and work out, right?
Yeah.
So that took me to Chicago. And once I got there and started to realize, okay, I'm a non-traditional student and in the field of law, you know, the track that I thought I was going to follow is not going to be it. You know, I thought that I would get like on that first summer after law school when all the firms come and interview you. I thought I'd get a summer gig and then end up working at the law firm and be able to work reasonable hours. You know, I had this really naive perspective, honestly, of how it would go. But you know, when it didn't go that way, I had to figure out what to do. So circumstances kind of forced me to think outside the box and to see opportunity where maybe someone else would not.
So how do you break that down? How do we make this actionable for other people? Because I think, you know, when I look at, you know, your background and when I look at some of the most influential people or organizations in the world, they all do something the exact same, which is they think outside the box and they see problems and solve problems differently than how, you know, most people would. You know, we're all used to horse and buggy, and then in comes Ford with, you know, the car. And how do you know, is there a process or a tip that you can give that you know, looking back, you go, you know what, I'm really glad I did this because it really started to open my eyes to some of the opportunities that otherwise wouldn't have been there.
Yes. So I can just tell people what I did. I had to divorce myself from the opinions of others. I think one of my podcast guests put it that way. I had to kind of get rid of the external forces and what the step 1, 2, 3 was that they said I should take because I couldn't take those and figure out another way. So I would make a list of my overall broad interests and goals, right? And so if my end goal in 10 years was to be an executive within the law group at a corporation, then will this particular opportunity that I'm entertaining help me get there? Is it going to develop the skill set that I need once I get there? Whether or not, you know, it's a glamorous, you know, super well paying job or not.
Right.
So my somebody kind of let me on to the idea or the fact that oftentimes positions that are good for lawyers within corporations aren't in the legal department and aren't labeled as attorney. A contract manager, where you basically kind of get to do the job of a lawyer, and they pay you less, but you get the experience, right? And then you get to move into the law group. So I learned that finally. I wish I had known that from the jump. So I try to tell lawyers that. And a friend of mine worked at Big Ten Network and extended me the opportunity to come in as a contractor and help her on some projects. She was the only lawyer in the building. And so eventually she left and I stepped into her shoes as the main attorney or contract manager for the contracts at Big Ten Network, which is a Fox subsidiary. So that was my first job. And I did that for 2 years. Once I reached the ceiling, something else you have to do is kind of constantly evaluate your goals, you know, where you are when things start to not feel right, when you start to feel like you're not growing, you know, expanding, you're not moving towards your goals, and you need to reevaluate. It's always good to reassess, reevaluate. You don't have to stay in a position for 5 years, 10 years, you know, if it's not working for you. I know my dad, you know, that was his generation. You work somewhere 30 years, you retire. I took that, ideology into my teaching career. I worked 10 years in the same school district. I thought I would be able to apply that skill, that mindset in law, but that I had to change that.
Right.
For sure.
Even in tech. And you bring up such a good point, because so much of this applies to life and business. We talk about this concept of agile, being flexible. We just built out a campaign around flexible remote workforces. And, how do you really remain agile as an organization? So how often do you really evaluate? At what point do you say, okay, I need to give this a minute? And at what point do you say, you know what, no, we're ready for that next iteration, that, 2.0, 3.0, whatever it is?
Yeah. So for me at Big Ten Network, it was when I was not growing anymore as a lawyer. There were no senior attorneys in the building with me. They were all in California. I couldn't move to California. I had to stay in Chicago because I had a family. So I'm like, I need to continue to develop my legal skill set, but also continue to advance, toward my long-term goal. And so my husband now, my second marriage, which is beautiful, he is a historian and was working on a book on the history of chess. And so we ended up at the St. Louis Chess Club. He was presenting his talk, and the manager of the club was curious about me, like what I do. And so I told her I'm a lawyer, I work in sports entertainment. And she goes, oh, we really want to push chess, US chess, into mainstream culture as a spectator sport. And so I said, oh, okay, that's very cool, and she goes, would you be interested in chatting about that? I was like, well, I'm a lawyer, I work around this. I support marketing and branding. But I said, but if I were you, I would do X, Y, Z, right? Because you're trained to critically think and analyze and evaluate as a lawyer. That's what makes us valuable within any industry, I think. So she asked me, hey, let's talk Monday. And we talked, and I put a proposal together and presented it to legs of the tour. And all of this was just like impromptu. She's like, I want you to present your proposal to the group. And the group ended up being somebody in Paris, somebody in London, somebody in. So I said, okay, this is a pretty big deal. At the same time, I worked within major corporations such as Aon and Caterpillar via Axiom. Axiom allowed me to continue to grow and develop as a corporate transactional attorney. And then my relationship with the chess industry complemented that.
Wow.
Yeah, complemented
my
vision, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm noticing, because I'm constantly trying to, find these correlations and these patterns, is that you're open to networking. I think that's a big one. You're open to reevaluating. You're not stuck on a plan, but you've got one. And I think that a lot of times we can over-rotate one or the other, where we have no plan and we're, fly by the seat of our pants, or we have too much of a plan. We're so rigid that we really can't think outside of it. And the other thing that I think is so incredibly powerful, and this goes, again, back to business, but also personally, as a personal development, is you are almost always open to hearing someone else's ideas and truly hearing what they have to say. I don't know many transactional entertainment attorneys working for one of the largest networks in the country by far, if not the world, say, you know what, I think I can help manage and position, the world's top chess player. But you didn't say no to it. And I think a lot of times we can be so narrow focused. I'll use the well overplayed use case of Uber. I don't know if many other organizations would have said, we've got a software company, let's revolutionize the taxi, industry. Mm-hmm. And there was nothing new about the idea of a software. I mean, we've been doing this for quite some time, but the fact that they realized that they could innovate something from a different angle, the fact that they saw that there was an opportunity and they saw that opportunity and seized on it, because even if the taxi industry had realized what Uber realized, that there was this market, this need, they wouldn't have been able to iterate because they were so stuck in, we have cars, this is our operation plan. And I think when you step outside of it, it's part of the like first steps of identifying opportunity. And part of stepping outside of sort of yourself, your plan, your box, is inviting other people to say, what do you think about this? Like you did with those conversations, and saying, okay, we'll give it a shot. Let's at least have the conversation.
Right. Yes. And I think it's so important to always be willing to have that conversation, like you said. And as you were talking, I was thinking that's why I enjoy working with startups and entrepreneurs so much. I know for a while I volunteered with the University of Chicago's Polsky Institute because they have these wonderful, bright ideas. They're excited about them. They're thinking outside the box. They're thinking about what the world needs, and to be able to support their I guess dreams or ambition is exhilarating for me, which is why the opportunity with Google Cloud, which is a big corporate startup, was so attractive to me and kind of fit within my interest.
Yeah. Right. And that's the next sort of progression, is then you went on this sort of tour, but then you went on to Google Cloud. And I know that there were a couple stops along the way, including Accenture, and I'm probably forgetting a few, but some really large, like I said, strategic, organizations. So what brought you to Google Cloud then? What another leap,
Right. So, I'm in the entertainment, sports, corporate world. I'd worked across industries. When I work as a corporate transactional business attorney, the contracting was always the core. Because you can take that skill set across industries. I am also, very clear that I have to make a living and support my children. So my ambitions or interests don't override practicality. So I'm always assessing the skills that I'm developing and making sure that they transfer. However, when I was approached by a Facebook recruiter a few years ago who saw my LinkedIn profile and saw my contracting negotiating experience, I didn't think my skill set fit into tech. I hadn't thought about it. Like, as an in-house lawyer, you see all kinds of agreements, of course, kind of worked with some tech agreements, some licensing stuff. So I had just taken a job at a firm. And so I wasn't ready to move to Washington State, but she's like, how about you just take an exploratory interview? And I said, sure. And I'm glad I did, because throughout the process, I was like, whoa, I like the tech industry. It's always changing, growing fast, innovative, exciting. That appeals to my need to continue to grow and learn new stuff and expand. But I did realize that my contracting, negotiating skill set fit within tech. And I learned that. And so I started to kind of focus on narrowing the scope of industries that I aligned myself to, decided tech was a good one. And so from there, when I was ready to move into tech, I interviewed with Microsoft and other entities, and did well, and ended up at Accenture, where I learned a ton about technology, met some wonderful people, and that led me to Google. I took the Google opportunity because it's a startup, and I love that. I feel like there's lots of opportunities for growth, lots of opportunities to make a difference. Yes, this is where I am.
And I know we only have 20 minutes. There's so many good just nuggets in here. When you talked about divorcing yourself from other people's opinions, there's so many good nuggets. And something you just talked about, I want to make sure we highlight before we run, is you're constantly seeking growth. That's really powerful. And I can tell you that studies of innovative leaders and innovative organizations show they're constantly innovating. That's just first and foremost. They're also constantly learning, and they build powerful teams. And so I think just kind of looking back at what you've done and where you're going, and I'm so excited for you for what's ahead. I mean, just think what's behind you. Think about what's ahead, you know? So I just see that there's just those powerful pieces that you've so perfected and leaned into and continue to. I mean, I've never heard you say, you know what, I'm done growing in that area. I've mastered that. I'm good there. And I think that's, that's something that I'm going to learn from you. And I hope people watching this learn from you and take away. So we've got to wrap up, unfortunately, but where can people find you? I know you've got a podcast, you've got a great presence. How do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so you can find my podcast and blogs at rhondacolemanwandel.com. Or you can email me at rhondacoleman@google.com.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you again. You're an exceptional person. I'm so glad you could be here, and I'm so excited to see what's next for you.
Thank you,
All right.
Sabrina.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.